Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Combating Cancer. My name is Gwen Kelly, and I am your host. If this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found us. This is a space for honesty. Real honesty, not the polished, inspirational version of cancer that people feel more comfortable consuming, but the complicated, uncomfortable, and very human truth of it. For anyone new, a little background about me. I was diagnosed with stage 3 astrocytoma brain cancer at the age of 19. And one of the biggest things I've learned since then is this: surviving cancer does not automatically bring peace. Sometimes it brings guilt. Today, I'm going to talk about survivor's guilt, and here's my first hot take. Survivor's guilt isn't rare, dramatic, or something only deep thinkers experience. It's one of the most common emotional side effects of cancer, and one of the most dismissed. Survivor's guilt is what happens when you keep breathing while other people don't. It's what happens when someone with your diagnosis dies, when someone you meet in treatment doesn't make it home, when your body responds to treatment and someone else's doesn't. It can even exist while you're still sick, just because you're doing better than someone else. No one warns you that survival can feel heavy. No one prepares you for the emotional whiplash of receiving good news in a world where so much bad news can exist. We talk about fighting, we talk about strength, we talk about hope, but we don't talk nearly enough about what happens after or alongside those things. Here's another thing. Survivor's guilt doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it shows up during moments that are supposed to feel happy. Clear scans, remission, birthdays you never thought you'd see. You feel relief and then almost immediately shame. You get shame for smiling, shame for relaxing, shame for wanting a future when someone else didn't get one. And the culture around cancer makes this worse because the second you try to name these feelings, someone shuts it down, where they say, you should be grateful, at least you're alive. Everything happens for a reason. I hate that one. Let me be clear, those phrases might be well-intentioned, but they are emotionally lazy. They skip over grief instead of sitting with it. And what they really communicate is this: your pain makes me uncomfortable. Survivor's guilt thrives in that silence. It grows when survivors feel like they're not allowed to mourn because they lived. Like their grief is inappropriate, like they should shrink their pain to make room for someone else's tragedy. But grief is not a competition. There is no hierarchy of suffering. You do not lose the right to grieve just because you survived. I felt survivor's guilt most intensely when I started combating cancer. I was hearing story after story, sons, daughters, parents, partners, best friends gone far too soon. And I was honored to hear them. Truly, these stories mattered. These people mattered. But when the mic turned off, I'd sit alone with the sinking question: why am I still here? Why did my body survive when theirs didn't? And that question doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from grief. It comes from love. It comes from witnessing loss up close and having nowhere to put it. And here's another uncomfortable truth. Survivor's guilt often turns into self-punishment. It convinces you that you owe the universe something, that survival is a debt you have to repay with productivity, advocacy, perfection, or constant gratitude. That if you aren't doing something big with your life, maybe you didn't deserve to live. But that is a lie. Cancer is not fair. It is not a test of character. It does not reward good people or punish bad ones. It does not care how hard you fought, how positive you stayed, or how badly you wanted to live. Incredible people die. Incredible people survive. And there is no moral logic behind it. Surviving cancer is not a moral achievement, and dying from cancer is not a moral failure. Cancer's the villain here, not you. And being alive is not something you need to justify. Surviving is not something to apologize for. And the goal is to not get over survivor's guilt. That expectation alone is cruel. The real goal is to learn how to carry it without letting it define you or destroy you. For me, carrying it means honoring the people who didn't get to stay. It means telling their stories, saying their names, refusing to let them be reduced to statistics or diagnoses. It means continuing to talk about cancer honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. Like right now, I'm sure I'm making half of you uncomfortable. Because silence is what lets this disease keep stealing without accountability. It also means allowing myself to remember people in ways that aren't always heavy. One of the ways I process survivor's guilt is by holding on to small pieces of people's stories, because people don't disappear all at once. They leave pieces of themselves behind. little reminders that show up in everyday life. I remember hearing about a little girl named Ellie from one of my past guests, and she loved unicorns. And now whenever I see a unicorn on a shirt, a toy, a bag, I think of her. And instead of feeling crushed, I think about that picture of her and I smile because for a moment, I know that someone is remembering her right now, that her family's probably thinking about her all the time. And I remember other people too in different ways, sometimes songs or quotes or colors. And those moments don't always feel sad. Sometimes they feel grounding, and it's just proof that love doesn't end just because life does. But here's another hot take. Joy is not disrespect. Smiling is not betrayal. Living is not forgetting. Survivor's guilt tells us that happiness is offensive, that moving forward means abandoning the people we lost, that laughter somehow erases grief. But I don't believe that. I believe choosing to live fully is one of the most radical ways to honor the people who didn't get that chance. If you're listening and carrying survivor's guilt, hear this clearly. You do not owe the world an extraordinary life to justify your survival. You do not need to turn your pain into purpose on demand. Sometimes surviving is the work. Sometimes honoring someone looks like advocacy. Sometimes it looks like memory. Sometimes it looks like getting out of bed. And if you can, say it out loud. Name it. Survivor's guilt loses power when it's acknowledged instead of buried. So if there's one thing I hope you take from this episode, it's this. The goal isn't to get over survivor's guilt, it's to learn how to carry it without letting it crush you. Because surviving is not a betrayal. Living is not something to apologize for. Because cancer is the villain in this entire story, not you. And sometimes just being here is enough. So thank you so much for being here and for helping keep all these stories alive. If you or someone you know would like to come on the podcast and share your story, if you have a business inquiry that aligns with our mission, please reach out to me. You can find me at combatingcancer.org. And yes, there's only one T. I did spell combating right. There's two different ways to spell it, but I will talk with you guys on next Wednesday.